Hi guys, for the moment I'm back and I'm going to be giving you a list of recommendations for books on self-defense. Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel, I review martial arts books and discuss other martial arts related topics. Today I'm going to be presenting a list of books that I think are very good for self-defense. I'm going to be breaking them up into two categories. One is fundamentals. And these are books that I think can sort of stand on their own and provide much or all of what you need for the physical side of self-defense and maybe a little bit more. I'm also going to be presenting a supplements section. So books that I think are good if you already have a solid background for self-defense, and they may specialize in certain areas. So we're going to kick things off with The Fence by Jeff Thompson. I'm a tremendous fan of this book. I think it is essential reading for anyone interested in self-defense. Basically, it covers the pre-fight interview stage of violence, and it covers the fence, which is this sort of defensive posture that you can use during this interview stage and from which you can launch offensive preemptive strikes. Although it doesn't cover a whole lot else when it comes to self-defense, I do think everyone interested in self-defense should have a copy of it, should read it, should understand the concept of the fence. Next book is No Second Chance by Mark Hatmaker. Bias alert here, he is a friend of mine, but still, it's a good book. I was a fan of his work before we ever met. As far as the contents of the book itself, roughly the first half goes over the survival mindset. And this is an important aspect that doesn't get covered in all self-defense books. I think it's important to understand the need to keep fighting no matter what the odds are. The second half of the book covers an extensive amount of techniques, and this will include partner drills, drills to use the environment. If there's any drawback, it may be that there's a little too much information here, but it does cover everything from standing strikes to ground fighting. And the next book I'm going to recommend is The Complete Book of Urban Combatives by Lee Morrison. Mr. Morrison, who is out of the UK, has made a pretty notable name for himself. The book itself, I would say, has some drawbacks in that I'm not a fan of the ground escapes, as they seem to be more reliant on pain. I think it could be organized a little bit better, but with that in mind, he has extensive experience in the realm of self-defense. I think he has an excellent selection of standing techniques, striking techniques. The book also covers things like improvised weapons and different sorts of environments one may find oneself in when defending oneself. Next up is The Art and Science of Self-Defense by Joe Verde. If you are familiar with some of his other works, he has a progressive sort of teaching method, and we start off with things like awareness, and we move on to the more complicated things like multiple attackers, and in between we of course have all the other aspects of self-defense, particularly on the physical side, covering things like strikes, takedowns, breakaways from attacks, and that sort of thing. Following that, I'm going to recommend Real Self-Defense by Jeff Thompson. This is a book I've already reviewed on my channel. He covers a lot when it comes to things like the adrenaline dump, which I think is very important. Also mental training. The book itself has interviews with people who've been criminals, and it gives you an insight as to why they did what they did and how they did it. There is a physical side as far as like self-defense techniques. It's not as extensive as some of the other works I've listed on here, but it provides, I would say, a solid enough arsenal. Next is another book that I reviewed, which is Street Tough by Phil Giles. This one is basically no-holds-barred street fighting, but it includes a number of drills, for instance, how to get into the clinch, how to work off the wall. It covers a number of ground escapes, and these are definitely street-oriented in the fact that we're using things like, fish hooking in order to peel someone off of you. So it is not as much on the preparatory side, like the awareness side of things, but as far as providing a physical arsenal and, again, a set of drills, I think it does a really good job. And finally in this list is Combatives for Street Survival by Kelly McCann. This is notable in that it spends time sort of telling you how to build your own combatives program. It does talk about things like awareness. It gives a very solid and limited arsenal for self-defense. I think limited is good, so you don't have to worry about, what are the 16 techniques I can choose from. It's like, I got 5 things, and I'm going to do one of them. Also includes a section on improvised weapons and the use of the environment. So now we're getting into the supplemental section, and like I said, I think if you already have a solid background in, knowing how to strike, knowing how to grapple, things like awareness and avoidance, then I think that these provide certain aspects of training that maybe some of the books that I previously covered did not. So the first I'm going to talk about here is Anatomy of a Street Fight by Paul Vunak. This goes over his RAT system, or Rapid Assault Tactics. I like this in that it sort of provides a roadmap for what I think is pretty solid physical side of self-defense. So the idea is to intercept an opponent's attack and blast them until you discombobulate them. And he prefers to finish them off with what he considers heavy artillery, headbutts, knees, and elbow strikes. This book also has a chapter on Kino Mutai, which is biting and gouging, and that's not something that you'll find discussed in a whole lot of books, so that might be worth checking out just for that section alone. Next is Silat for the Street. I think I've actually covered this as well. I like this one. It's by Burton Richardson because it includes a number of entries, controls, and attacks / takedowns from the clinch. I think the clinch is a very misunderstood part. In fact, the next few things I'm going to be recommending have to do with the clinch. But I like his because it is simple, and we're going on entries that one could do out of the fence position or out of another defensive sort of talking hands position. Another book to recommend, A Professional's Guide to Ending Violence Quickly by Mark McYoung. This one talks extensively about how to off-balance someone and how to basically take away their ability to fight, how to disrupt their center of gravity. I think these concepts are important to understand. Again, this is more along the lines of clinch fighting. Some of it, of course, can be used from a distance, but I like how it explains it very well. Although I will say some of his setups are a little bit weird. He's like grabbing arms out of the air as somebody's punching. I don't think you could rely on that. But again, the concepts it covers are very good, and for that reason I'd recommend it. Jujitsu Complete by Kiyose Nakai. This is another one that I've reviewed. This I like because he provides roughly a half dozen throws and standing locks, and he shows how to use them interchangeably. So if someone already has a background, like if you're good enough to throw or foot sweep someone, if you're good enough to control the clinch and maybe get an arm lock or something, this will give you sort of a game plan as to how to flow back and forth between this relatively small selection of techniques. Fighting in the Clinch by Lauren Christensen and Mark Morales. This covers the clinch extensively, and it's everything from like classic wrestling takedowns and controls, some judo-style throws. We also have things like clothing grabs and close-range strikes. It is ultimately meant for more of a street defense, no rules sort of mentality. You will see some sport applicable things in here, but that's because the separation between street and sport actually is a little blurry sometimes. You know, if you can throw somebody in judo, you can throw somebody on the street. So this is, again, a book that covers that extensively, and that's why I'd recommend it. Next up is the Complete Book of Combat Systema. This one I like because it has a lot of drills on how to control and manipulate the opponent, how to be sensitive to their movements and how to adapt to that. There is a little bit of weirdness in here. I don't think it really has anything to offer as far as distance striking. But again, as far as like various control positions in standing grappling, in the clinch, things that you won't necessarily find in sport. You know, Mr. Secure was a bouncer, so he's learned what works when you get behind someone, for instance. Next book up, When the Fight Goes to the Ground by Laurie O'Connell. This one focuses a lot on getting off of the ground fighting for self-defense. There's an emphasis on pin escapes. The benefit to this one, or one of the extra benefits, is that it comes with a DVD. And again, this one is street-oriented. You're going to see some stuff that you would find in sport, of course, because, again, the lines are blurry. But you're also going to find things like, you know, how to attack someone in such a way in order to create a disruption so that you can get out of a pin. For the next book, we're bringing up Mr. Thompson again. Jeff Thompson did a series on ground fighting. One of them was exclusively on escapes. And again, this is something I think a lot of people could benefit from. If you are in a self-defense situation, the last thing you want to do is be trapped on the ground. So I would look this one up in order to learn some very solid ground escapes. The Naked Edge by Steve Tirani. This one is on knife defense. I think the first 2/3 of the book are really good. I've reviewed this one on my channel. Again, the first 2/3 are very much about avoiding the knife and controlling the arm that has the knife. I think it gets a little too complicated in the third section, but first 2 sections are really good, and I'd recommend it just for that. Contemporary Knife Targeting by Gross and Janich. This one is primarily focused on what happens when people are cut in certain places and the effects of the wounds. This is important to understand for self-defense. If you find yourself, you know, opened up with a blade and you're like, oh no, I'm going to die in the next 5 seconds. It's like, no, you got like 10 minutes before you even lose consciousness. It also covers like counter knife concepts. So knife versus empty hand, knife versus knife defense, and takes legal considerations into that. For instance, a lot of the defenses that they have end with cutting the guy on the leg just above the knee, so you sever the tendons so he can't follow you, as opposed to, you know, something far more lethal. So that's another one that I would recommend for knife defense. So that list ended up being a little bit longer than I expected it to be. But there we go. I hope you guys will take some of this into consideration. I hope you like these lists. If there's something you think stands out to you, please let me know. Share it in the comments. And I'll see you later.